You're listening to the official Reformed Stoic Podcast, covering politics, philosophy, theology, conspiracy theories. I'm ready to get to the bottom of this life. Are you? Join Wolfgang, Sketty Squad, Purity Gang, as we strive to take dominion over this dying planet. I am Reformed Stoic, and this is my podcast. Let's go, my people, my people, my people now. People to times. How's the gang doing? How's the gang activity been holding up? Slanging and ganging and banging. How we doing, my friends? Threw together a decent show for you today. Got a few interesting topics ready to rock and roll. We got the Crinkler over here, just barely off camera. I ran out of cigarettes, so hopefully I'm going to get back on my working out. Might try to hit a workout after the stream. Heck, I might even hit a cold bath today. Let's go. Sleeping in a little bit. We got to get it back together, baby. How's everybody doing on this lovely Thursday? Well, my friends, what I got for you today is a history stream. We're also going to cover a semi-relevant topic, but we're going to go ahead and get into the history of the Central Intelligence Agency, commonly known as the CIA. Good morning. So we're going to get that going. My mic looking good? All right. Then we're going to look into TikTok data gathering, more or less, or just kind of try to get a little bit of intel on what the deal is with TikTok and why maybe Western citizens should be concerned. Finally, a topic that I find interesting, and just to kind of give an example of how we can hit the religious segment from a number of different angles, we're going to look into Benedictine monks today. Something that I find interesting. I really enjoy listening to like Benedictine chants. So, we'll just kind of play it by ear with the time. Stream usually goes from between 2 to 2.5 hours. But if it was ever to go shorter than that, I'm sure it would be fine. I'm sure it would be fine, my friends. So, you are not banned, my friend. You are here. I see you. With that being said, let me get a couple of things ready here. All right. Buckle up, buckaroos, because it's time. All right, hold on. I screwed it up. Okay. Buckle up, buckaroos, because it's time. You're listening to the Reformed Stoic News segment. Let's go! That is right, my friends. How's that for a segment intro? Let's get it. All right. Lovely. So, moving right along. Establishment of the CIA. This is trumanlibrary.gov. This is a government website. So you know it's good information. All right. Background. The CIA evokes images of clandestine activity, spies holding in corners, and covert overthrow of unfriendly government regimes. However, when Truman established the organization in 1947, hopefully we're going to get a full name there. The CIA did evolve to become much more than a news agency for the president, as covert operations began in earnest early in the agency's history. Come on, Wrinkles, go. The CIA grew out of a wartime agency, the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, which was established to help win World War II. From the onset, the OSS was intended to be a temporary agency with plans to dissolve it upon the end of the war. However, as tensions grew with the Soviet Union, many within the OSS were determined to keep it intact. By the end of the war, it was clear a Cold War was emerging, and Americans were behind the game with intelligence gathering, unlike the Russians, who'd been engaging in covert operations for years. While a need for intelligence was clear, debate raged over the role of this agency, as well as who would govern it and how it would be funded. Finding a leader was difficult as well. Military leaders strongly objected to former OSS officials taking the lead, noting there were the men who'd slept through Pearl Harbor. However, should the agency be civilian-led, all major discussions and funding, in order to be consistent with American democracy, would need approval from Congress. This could be problematic for a secret agency. The establishment of the CIA as we know it did not appear overnight. It was the product of debates among military, state, and defense leaders with input from the public, thanks to key leaks that took the issue to the newspapers. Coming off of World War II and the defeat of the totalitarian Nazi regime, many Americans feared our own government would become what we had just defeated. Truman himself had similar concerns, but as the Cold War heated up, he became more open to its development. After much discussion and debate over structure, Truman finally signed the National Security Act in September 1947, which gave birth to the CIA. The National Security Act. While Truman had intended to establish an agency that correlated all intelligence and delivered reports to the president, he soon realized that under the Cold War structure, the agency would become more than that. Moreover, Americans who once had feared the establishment of such an agency began to embrace it as a necessary tool to winning the Cold War. Still, the establishment and use of the CIA during the Truman administration and subsequent presidencies remained a topic of controversy, begging the question of its role in a transparent democracy while facing a totalitarian rival in Soviet Russia. So, they were created for war purposes, specifically for Cold War purposes, and it was the recycled OSS. Smearcast. I want to see if I can pull up something real quick. Let's do President Kennedy's final address to the United States General Assembly. JFK files reveal CIA plots. Oswald's Cuba connection. Yeah, I just watched this movie. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see a JFK speech where he says something about the CIA. President Kennedy's final address to the United Nations General Assembly. Not really sure where to turn here. Let's give this a shot. Let's watch a JFK speech.
Mr. President, as one who has taken some interest in the election of presidents, I want to congratulate you on your election to this high office. Mr. Secretary General, delegates to the United Nations, ladies and gentlemen, we meet again in the quest for peace. 24 months ago, when I last had the honor of addressing this body, the shadow of fear lay darkly across the world. The freedom of West Berlin, wars in immediate peril, agreement on a neutral Laos seemed remote. The mandate of the United Nations in the Congo was under fire. Hold back the darkness. Today the clouds have lifted a little so that new rays of hope can break through. The pressures on West Berlin appear to be temporarily eased. Political unity in the Congo has been largely restored. A neutral coalition in Laos, while still in difficulty, is at least in being. The integrity of the United Nations Secretariat has been reaffirmed. A United Nations decade of development is underway. And for the first time in 17 years of effort, a specific step has been taken to limit the nuclear arms race. I refer, of course, to the treaty to ban nuclear tests in the atmosphere, outer space, and underwater.
Banning nuclear tests. So, and keep in mind, I just watched the JFK movie the other day, and I'm trying to figure out, like, how accurate it is, because it's pretty mind-blowing, the line of discovery they go down in that movie. But, yeah, they did mention that he was trying to pull us out of all global conflicts and end nuclear testing, end space nuclear testing. He was kind of heading in a direction that looked like it was pulling us away from war. And then he died.
Concluded by the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States, and already signed by nearly 100 countries. It has been hailed by people the world over who are thankful to be free from the fears of nuclear fallout. And I am confident that on next Tuesday, at 10:30 o'clock in the morning, it will receive the overwhelming endorsement of the Senate of the United States. The world has not escaped from the darkness. The long shadows of conflict and crisis envelop us still. But we meet today in an atmosphere of rising hope and at a moment of comparative calm. My presence here today is not a sign of crisis, but of confidence. I am not here to report on a new threat to the peace or new signs of war. I have come to salute the United Nations and to show the support of the American people for your daily deliberations. For the value of this body's weapon, the reduction of global tension must not be an excuse for the narrow pursuit of self-interest. If the Soviet Union and the United States, with all of their global interests,
It doesn't help
and
the cause.
clashing commitments of ideology, and with nuclear weapons still aimed at each other today, can find areas of common interest and agreement, then surely other nations can do the same. Nations caught in regional conflicts, in racial issues, or in the death throes of old colonialism. Chronic disputes which divert precious resources from the needs of the people or drain the energies of both sides serve the interests of no one. And the badge of responsibility in the modern world is a willingness to seek peace.
Yeah, I don't necessarily feel like JFK was some hero or anything. It's like he said enough to get killed. It doesn't necessarily mean that everything he was about was great.
Peaceful solutions. It is never too early to try, and it's never too late to talk. And the United States, as a major nuclear power, does have a special responsibility to the world. It is, in fact, a threefold responsibility. A responsibility to our own citizens, a responsibility to the people of the whole world who are affected by our decisions, and to the next generation of humanity. We believe the Soviet Union also has these special responsibilities, and that those responsibilities require our two nations to concentrate less on our differences and more on the means of resolving them peacefully. For too long, both of us have increased our military budgets, our nuclear stockpiles, and our capacity to destroy all life on this hemisphere, human, animal, vegetable, without any corresponding increase in our security. Our conflicts, to be sure, are
Cash App should be working. Let's go.
real. Our concepts of the world are different. No service is performed by failing to make clear our disagreements. A central difference is the belief of the American people in self-determination for all people. We believe that the people of Germany and Berlin must be free to reunite their capital and their country. We believe that the people of Cuba must be free to secure the fruits of the revolution that have been betrayed from within and exploited from without. Protection of freedom. And our determination to safeguard that freedom will measure up to any threat or challenge.
Let's go.
But I would say to the leaders of the Soviet Union and to their people that if either of our countries is to be fully secure, we need a much better weapon than the H-bomb, a weapon better than ballistic missiles or nuclear submarines, and that better weapon is peaceful cooperation.
Cringe.
We have in recent years agreed on a limited test ban treaty, on an emergency communications link between our capitals, on a statement of principles for disarmament, on an increase in cultural exchange, on cooperation in outer space, on the peaceful exploration of the Antarctic, and on tempering last year's crisis over Cuba.
Interesting that he mentions cooperation in outer space. I mean, it is something that was talked about, when we're discussing certain theories about the world. People are like, well, what about other space stations? Well, here he is in 1963 discussing space cooperation.
I believe, therefore, that the Soviet Union and the United States, together with their allies, can achieve further agreements. Agreements which spring from our mutual interest in avoiding mutual destruction. There can be no doubt about the agenda of further steps. We must continue to seek agreement.
You know, we might have entered a time where presidents are kept more in the dark. He just might have known too much. You know, he might have been hearing like too much about certain operations that were going on. And then as presidencies unfolded throughout the decades after, because I just kind of feel like a lot of presidents are kept in the dark and they're puppets, and depending on who they are, I mean, the Bush family seems like they would be in the know, but you know, sometimes I feel like these modern presidents we have, they're just talking pieces. They just wave and smile, and Obama's speeches are the cringest thing ever, dude. And yeah, that's another, not trying to throw my parents under the bus on my podcast, but my parents were always just like, oh my, we'd watch an Obama speech together and they'd be like, he's just so well spoken. I just really like him, you know. He's just so well spoken. They're just a charisma piece, communications.
Agreements on measures which prevent war by accident or miscalculation. We must continue to seek agreement on safeguards against surprise attack, including observation posts at key points. We must continue to seek agreement on further measures to curb the nuclear arms race by controlling the transfer of nuclear weapons.
Yeah, see, they're probably hating the sound of this. Like, we want to slow down the nuclear arms race. Man, we're just trying, because I'm sure there's all kind of money going into that. You know, we talk about how, like, NASA's a sinkhole for money, but what about nuclear weapons? What kind of money's going into that?
Converting fissionable materials to peaceful purposes.
Hell, I'd love to do a show on nuclear weapons at some point.
And banning underground testing with adequate inspection and enforcement. We must continue to seek agreement on a freer flow of information and people from east to west and west to east. We must continue to seek agreement, encouraged by yesterday's affirmative response to this proposal by the Soviet foreign minister on an arrangement to keep weapons of mass destruction out of outer space. Let us get our negotiators back to the negotiating table to work out a practicable arrangement to this end. Purposes. Finally, in a field where the United States and the Soviet Union have a special capacity in the field of space, there is room for new cooperation, for further joint efforts in the regulation and exploration of space. I include among these possibilities a joint expedition to the moon. Space offers no problems of sovereignty. By resolution of this assembly, the members of the United Nations have forsworn any claim to territorial rights in outer space or on celestial bodies, and declared that international law and the United Nations Charter will apply. Why, therefore, should man's first flight to the moon be a matter of national competition? Why should the United States and the Soviet Union, in preparing for such expeditions, become involved in immense duplications of research, construction, and expenditure? Surely we should explore whether the scientists and astronauts of our two countries, and that freedom is more enduring than coercion. And in the contest for a better life, all the world can be a winner. The effort to improve the conditions of man, however, is not a task for the few. It is the task of all nations, acting alone, acting in groups, acting in the United Nations. For plague and pestilence and plunder and pollution, the hazards of nature and the hunger of children are the foes of every nation. Has man had such capacity to control his own environment,
to end thirst and hunger, to conquer poverty and disease, to banish illiteracy and massive human misery. We have the power to make this the best generation of mankind in the history of the world, or to make it the last. The provision of development assistance by individual nations must go on, but the United Nations also must play a larger role in helping bring to all men the fruits of modern science and industry. A United Nations conference on this subject, held earlier this year at Geneva, opened new vistas for the developing countries. Next year, a United Nations conference on trade will consider the needs of these nations for new markets. And more than 4/5 of the entire United Nations system can be found today mobilizing the weapons of science and technology for the United Nations decade of development. But more can be done. A World Center for Health Communications under the World Health Organization could warn of epidemics and the adverse effects of certain drugs, as well as transmit the results of new experiments and new discoveries.
Ooh, the World Health Organization. Ooh, man. Ooh.
Regional research centers could advance our common medical knowledge and train new scientists and doctors for new nations. A global system of satellites could provide
Did somebody say new nation?
communication and weather information for all corners of the earth. A worldwide program of conservation could protect the forest and wild game preserves now in danger of extinction for all time, improve the marine harvest of food from our oceans, and prevent the contamination of air and water by industrial as well as nuclear pollution. And finally, a worldwide program of farm productivity and food distribution, similar to our country's Food for Peace program, could now give every child the food he needs. New efforts are needed. If this Assembly's Declaration of Human Rights, now 15 years old, is to have full meaning. And new means should be found for promoting the free expression and trade of ideas through travel and communication and through increased exchanges of people and books and broadcasts. For as the world renounces the competition of weapons, competition in ideas must flourish. And that competition must be as full and as fair as possible. The United States delegation will be prepared to suggest to the United Nations initiatives in the pursuit of all these goals. For this is an organization for peace, and peace cannot come without work and without progress. The peacekeeping record of the United Nations has been a proud one, though its tasks are always formidable. We are fortunate to have the skills of our distinguished Secretary General and the brave efforts of those who have been serving the cause of peace in the Congo and the Middle East, in Korea and Kashmir, in West New Guinea and Malaysia. But what the United Nations has done in the past is less important than the tasks for the future. We cannot take its peacekeeping machinery for granted. That machinery must be soundly financed, which it cannot be if some members are allowed to prevent it from...
Dude, you know what's crazy is I think I'm kind of related to FDR. I heard that he's related to John Adams, and yeah, my mom's side of the family is related to John Adams, so why am I not a freaking elite billionaire, dude?
Meeting its obligations by failing to meet their own. The United Nations must be supported.
But yeah, FDR's got a fascinating history. We could do a segment on FDR at some point. He's got a banking family, and he's establishment for sure.
By all those who exercise their franchise here, and its operations must be back to the end. Too often a project... I also hope that the recent initiative of several members in preparing standby peace forces for United Nations call will encourage similar commitments by others. This nation remains ready to provide logistic and other material support. Policing, moreover, is not enough without provision for Pacific settlement. We should increase the resort to special missions of fact-finding and conciliation, make greater use of the International Court of Justice, and accelerate the work of the International Law Commission. The United Nations cannot survive as a static organization. Its obligations are increasing, as well as its size. Its charter must be changed, as well as its customs. The authors of that charter did not intend that it be frozen in perpetuity. The science of weapons and war has made us all, far more than 18 years ago in San Francisco, one world and one human race with one common destiny. In such a world, absolute sovereignty no longer assures us of absolute security. The conventions of peace must pull abreast and then ahead of the inventions of war. The United Nations, building on its successes and learning from its failures, must be developed into a genuine world security system. But peace does not rest. 2 years ago, I told this body that the United States had proposed and was willing to sign a limited test ban treaty. Today, that treaty has been signed. It will not put an end to war. It will not remove basic conflicts. It will not secure freedom for all, but it can be a lever. And Archimedes, in explaining the principles of the lever, was said to have declared to his friends, "Give me a place where I can stand, and I shall move the world." My fellow inhabitants of this planet, let us take our stand here in this assembly of nations, and let us see that if we, in our own time, can move the world to a just and lasting peace.
Let's check this one out. This is more what I was looking for, I think. Listen carefully. Red pills incoming.
Ladies and gentlemen, the very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies,
Here we go.
to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of elections, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations.
Woo.
Its preparations are concealed, not published.
Wow.
Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. No president should fear public scrutiny of his program, for from that scrutiny comes understanding, and from that understanding comes support or opposition, and both are necessary. I am not asking your newspapers to support an administration, but I am asking your help in the tremendous task of informing and alerting the American people. For I have complete confidence in the response and dedication of our citizens whenever they are fully informed. I not only could not stifle controversy among your readers, I welcome it. This administration intends to be candid about its errors. For as a wise man once said, an error doesn't become a mistake until you refuse to correct it. We intend to accept full responsibility for our errors, and we expect you to point them out when we miss them. Without debate, without criticism, no administration and no country can succeed, and no republic can survive. That is why the Athenian lawmaker Solon decreed it a crime for any citizen to shrink from controversy. And that is why our press was protected by the First Amendment, the only business in America specifically protected by the Constitution, not primarily to amuse and entertain, not to emphasize the trivial and the sentimental, not to simply give the public what it wants, but to inform, to arouse, to reflect, to state our dangers and our opportunities, to indicate our crises and our choices, to lead, mold, educate, and sometimes even anger public opinion. This means greater coverage and analysis of international news, for it is no longer far away and foreign, but close at hand and local. It means greater attention to improved understanding of the news, as well as improved transmission. And it means, finally, that government at all levels must meet its obligation to provide you with the fullest possible information outside the narrowest limits of national security. And so it is to the printing press, to the recorder of man's deeds, the keeper of his conscience, the courier of his news, that we look for strength and assistance, confident that with your help, man will be what he was born to be, free and independent.
Okay, now that sounds like the kind of talk that got him thwacked. And I like how he starts off talking about secret societies and oaths and then seamlessly goes into military and military intelligence. Red pills there for those who are primed to see them. All right, well, we're definitely going to have plenty of material for today because none of that was scheduled. Let's get into this soy. I don't know if you guys saw my post yesterday. I just posted, it says, what do people eat in Antarctica? And I just posted it with soy. And if you watch that video, dude, if there's something I learned from that video, it's that women can be soy too. Everybody on Antarctica is soy. And it's so funny how it just kind of, it's like, oh, you think Antarctica is an ice wall? And, oh, you think that there's like top secret ops going on at Antarctica? Well, everybody there is really soy. And science people are soy. Therefore, logically, if everyone who's there is soy and all science people are soy, then everyone there is top secret ops. All right, let's go.
America has a lot of intelligence agencies, a whopping 16 to be exact. During the Cold War, 2 stand out as particularly important players in the spy versus spy game between the United States and the Soviet Union: the National Security Agency and the Central Intelligence Agency. The CIA was and is tasked with spying and espionage abroad, while the NSA concerns itself with monitoring and decrypting communications. Both of them developed from the experiences America had during the 2 world wars, and during the 20th century, would grow to become shadowy organizations with secret budgets and powers beyond possibly even their own government's control. But before we tell the story of what they've done, or at least have been accused of doing, we have to, as we did in our video on the KGB, find out about the humble origins of these two organizations. I'm your host David, and this week it's all about cloak and dagger bureaucracy. This is the Cold War.
Burger!
All warfare is won and lost on intelligence. As long as countries have been competing for power, there have been spies to uncover and counter each other's plans. The value of intelligence has been written about at least as far back as Sun Tzu. By the time of the World Wars, however, the game had changed quite a bit. Inventions in technology like radios, machine encryption, and advanced cryptography created a need for a much broader bureaucracy to handle the sheer volume of information. Now, the first seeds of what would become the NSA and CIA come from the First World War. The US found itself needing telegraph machines and cable systems to coordinate the US's efforts against the Germans. To handle the development of codes and ciphers for said machines, the US set up a small Washington bureau to manage this operation called the Cable and Telegraph Bureau, or Cipher Bureau. By the end of the war, it had moved to New York City and absorbed the other cryptographic organization managed by the US Navy. It was also renamed to Military Intelligence, or MI8. After the war, although MI8 was officially disbanded, instead of shutting down the organization, it continued under the name of the Cipher Bureau, which even had its own disguise, posing as a private company selling commercial code. Still, it had the intrigue.
And it even had its own disguise. As a coding company. Oh, wow. So companies disguise themselves as other things when really they work covert operations? Wow, that's pretty interesting. Intrepid Corp. All right.
Nickname of the Black Chamber. It did peacetime cryptanalytic work for the State Department and US Army. Their work focused on intercepting and breaking the diplomatic codes of other countries, including allies, because let's be honest, every country is spying on every other country to one extent or another. There's no real trust in high politics. They got the telegrams by convincing Western Union to illegally send them copies of telegrams going to consulates and embassies within the US. They'd continue to do this until a 1927 law passed increasing punishments for intercepting other people's telegrams. The Black Chamber was led by cryptologist Herbert Yeardley, who ran the organization until the government cut it in 1929. In something that may be seen as out of place today, the US government closed it because, well, gentlemen don't read other people's mail. Yeardley, for his part, continued to do a little bit of work doing cryptography for the Canadian and Chinese governments during the Second World War, and then wrote a book on his time in the Black Chamber. I should also note that in 1930, the military set up its own cryptanalysis organization as a sort of successor called the Signal Intelligence Service, which we'll talk more about in just a moment. This project was only the beginning of such programs, and nowhere close to the end of them. The Second World War would end up revitalizing and vastly expanding such programs, leading to the births of both the CIA and NSA. Now, during the Second World War, the US and UK found themselves working in close collaboration with each other. As such, the Americans saw the effectiveness of the British intelligence services. The British trained special operations officers through the Special Operations Executive, whose job was to raid and sabotage German operations in continental Europe. They modeled their tactics after their experience fighting the Boers in South Africa. They would strike hard and fast and then disappear before the enemy could mount a response. Along with this, the British also had a well-developed cryptanalytic intelligence operation known as the Secret Intelligence Service, or MI6. MI6 decoded enemy radio transmissions, collected information with aerial photography, and even worked on sowing disinformation to the enemy to confuse their spies. These two organizations inspired US President Franklin Roosevelt and prompted the US to make its own version. He signed into existence a new intelligence organization called the Office of Strategic Services, or OSS, in 1942. The OSS became a precious asset for the United States and the Allies during the war, figuring out how the German war effort functioned. When the Americans entered the European theater of the war, the OSS found allies and landing spots in North Africa for the US military to begin their invasion there. They also sabotaged infrastructure, spread anti-Nazi propaganda, and organized resistance fighters against both the Germans and Japanese. Many Cold War figures, like Ho Chi Minh and Mao Zedong, received arms and training for their soldiers from OSS operatives. Not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but the US does have an established track record of training and arming its future enemies. But I digress. Now, it's also during this time, and this is not officially confirmed since the paper trail either remains classified or may have even been destroyed, the OSS purchased cryptographic tools for breaking Soviet codes, while still wartime allies with Moscow, spying on your friends and all of that. At the same time as this was going on, the Signal Intelligence Service continued to provide cryptanalysis for the Army, trying to decipher Axis communications, as well as train signal units for the battlefield. Think of the OSS as spies and commandos in the field, while the SIS were Washington-based mathematicians in suits breaking codes. Notably, about 70% of the SIS's staff were women. Included in these women would be future NSA Deputy Director and Japanese codecracker extraordinaire Anne Cara Christie. Her team's work uncovered the shipping codes of the Japanese Navy and wound up sinking 2/3 of their merchant marine. Like the SIS, they too began to intercept and try to crack Soviet codes, which would lead to the Venona project, which we've actually talked about in earlier videos, and we'll discuss more in the future. This Venona project exposed a network of Soviet spies across North America, including the collection of nuclear spies at Los Alamos. With the war's end in 1945, the OSS and SIS were both dissolved as organizations and absorbed into other bureaucracies. There was a major discussion in American military circles about how to organize the post-war armed forces. In these early meetings, the first utterance of making a centralized intelligence agency was floated, which manifested itself, against the wishes of the Army and the FBI, mind you, into the National Intelligence Authority. US President Harry Truman signed the organization into existence in 1946, as well as an operations group known as the Central Intelligence Group, or CIG. The next year, however, in the face of the deepening conflict with the Soviet Union, Truman signed the National Security Act, which reorganized both these organizations yet again. One became the National Security Council, which is the body the president goes to for discussion on national security issues, and the Central Intelligence Agency. The famous, or infamous, CIA was officially born. The CIA was created with 4 relatively broad main tasks in mind. 1. Advise the National Security Council on matters related to national security. 2. Make recommendations to the NSC regarding the coordination of intelligence activities of the departments. 3. Correlate and evaluate intelligence and provide for its appropriate dissemination. And 4. Perform such other functions as the NSC will from time to time direct. In 1949, the Central Intelligence Agency Act gave it a secret budget, allowed for a secret organizational structure, and gave it extreme protection from any form of accountability or transparency. The intent was to allow the new agency freedom to operate quickly in defense of liberty and justice without bureaucracy to slow things down. What could possibly go wrong here, right? Now, also in 1949, the various cryptographic departments through the government became centralized under one organization called the Armed Forces Security Agency. The chiefs of staff of the different branches of the armed forces all commanded them. This organizational structure is a big deal, as jurisdictional fights between the branches of the military were, and still are, a big thing. Some strange developments, like nuclear submarines for example, are part of a compromise to let every branch of the military have its own nukes, for example. But the problem with the AFSA from the beginning was that, unlike the CIA, it was a military organization, and thus it didn't coordinate well with the civilian structure of the US government. They clashed and rarely communicated well with their siblings like the CIA and FBI. The AFSA was stepping on a lot of toes, and generally the intelligence branches of the US weren't functioning well. This organizational problem prompted a need for yet another reorganization effort ordered by President Truman in 1951. This investigation resulted in the directive to create the National Security Agency, which came into existence late the next year. The NSA would be in charge of all communications intelligence, while the CIA took care of espionage. But here's the thing, that was all a secret. The NSA was a secret branch of the intelligence service. The memo creating it was classified, and the joke around the office was that the NSA stood for no such agency. The US government would grow to become obsessed with intelligence gathering and analysis, hence the 16 agencies I'd mentioned earlier. Secrets and special operations were par for the course. Throughout this channel's run, many of the plans to assassinate the leaders of decolonization movements, overthrow governments, or sabotage communist organizations would occur under the watch of the CIA. At the same time, the NSA would have its ears everywhere, and which we saw when Edward Snowden leaked plans on PRISM really means everywhere. The FBI would use similar tactics to undermine the domestic anti-war and civil rights movements at home. All of this was done in the name of stopping communism, or, depending on your worldview, to crush dissent at home. More than one parallel has been drawn to their KGB cousins in the Soviet Union. The Cold War would allow these intelligence agencies to grow into massive, almost unaccountable bureaucracies, which in some ways persist to this day. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and to make sure you don't miss all of our future episodes, please make sure you're subscribed to our channel and have wired
Soy, 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 soy. Let's eat some soy. Fun fact, in World War II, the British version of the OSS, the SOE, was nicknamed the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. Read The Puzzle Palace and The Body of Secrets by James Bamford for more on the NSA. The KGB would be the NSA, CIA, and FBI put together. You see, the Soviets believe in collectivism and monopolization, while US believed in specialization on competition. The great part about arming future enemies is that you'll always have new enemies to fight. All right. Well, we've gone pretty long on this segment, so let's go ahead and finish it up with History.com. History of the CIA. The CIA, or Central Intelligence Agency, is the U.S. government agency tasked primarily with gathering intelligence and international security information from foreign countries. The controversial spy agency's history dates back to World War II, and it played a key role in the U.S. efforts to combat the Axis powers during that conflict, and in the Cold War that followed. Though shrouded in secrecy, some CIA activities, such as covert military and cybersecurity operations, have drawn public scrutiny and criticism. The Office of Strategic Services. The United States government has always had spies working against foreign interests, just as our enemies have used espionage against America. Consider, for example, Benedict Arnold's failed plot to turn the American fort at West Point, New York, over to the British during the Revolutionary War. But our government's first large-scale institutional foray into spycraft started during World War II, after the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. Declassified government documents suggest that our military should have been better prepared for the attack on Pearl Harbor. Indeed, Naval Intelligence, an espionage division of the U.S. Navy, had reportedly cracked Japanese military and diplomatic codes, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation had observed Japanese diplomats stationed in Hawaii, engaged in suspicious activities in the weeks leading up to the attack. However, what was sorely lacking was a centralized agency within the government that could sort through information gathered from spies working on behalf of the country, analyze it, and report it to relevant officials. With that in mind, President Franklin D. Roosevelt established the Office of Strategic Services. Aha! So FDR started the OSS, predecessor to the CIA. The forerunner to today's CIA, and appointed New York lawyer and World War I hero General William J. Donovan to head the fielding agency. The original mandate of the OSS was to collect and analyze strategic information for use in war. The National Security Act. With the OSS, Donovan, known by the moniker of Wild Bill Donovan, was able to send saboteurs behind enemy lines to compromise military installations, disseminate disinformation to mislead Japanese and German forces, and attempt to recruit resistance fighters. The agency had some 12,000 staffers in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere, including, for example, 500 or so field agents working in German-occupied France. At the conclusion of World War II, however, President Harry Truman, who had taken office following Roosevelt's death, didn't see a need for the OSS and abolished it. Within a year of that decision, and after the beginning of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, the new president had a change of heart. With many of the former OSS leaders still on hand in Washington, he first established a Central Intelligence Group and National Intelligence Agency in 1946. Then, in 1947, Congress passed the National Security Act, which led to the formation of the National Security Council and the CIA as it's known today. From its founding in 1947 until 2005, the CIA was run by the Director of Central Intelligence. This position was generally filled by leaders from various fields, including the military, politics, or business. A number of notable people held this post, including the first Roscoe H. Hillenkoetter and former President George H.W. Bush, who served for 2 years in 1976 to 77. George Tenet was the DCI from 1996 to 2004. And some hold him and the agency under his leadership responsible for intelligence failures in the lead-up to the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001. In 2004, Congress passed the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act, which overhauled the leadership structure of the intelligence services and placed all of them, including the Department of Homeland Security and the CIA, under the auspices of the newly created position of Director of National Intelligence. As a result, the CIA is now headed up by the Director of the CIA. The post of CIA Director has been held by a number of important figures, including former Democratic Congressman Leon Panetta, who was President Barack Obama's first CIA Director. Panetta was in charge when the agency's harsh interrogation techniques used in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks were publicly revealed. The current CIA Director is Mike Pompeo, a former 4-term congressman from Kansas and CEO of an aerospace firm. Aerospace, CIA, let's go. Current Deputy Director Gina Haspel is a career-long intelligence officer. The CIA headquarters are in Langley, Virginia. The Bay of Pigs. While the CIA has certainly expanded America's intelligence apparatus, the agency currently has some 50,000 staffers. It has not always been successful in its operations around the world. For example, declassified government records suggest that the CIA was behind the failed 1961 Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba. The agency recruited Cuban exiles living in the United States and trained them in military tactics for an invasion of the island nation that had come under the leadership of communist Fidel Castro following a revolution. The poorly planned operation was a fiasco, and rather than weakening Castro's hold on power, the botched affair strengthened his hand, and Castro remained in office for many years. Air America. From the 1950s through the 1970s, a CIA-operated cargo and passenger airline company called Air America was created to enable the agency to access the areas in Southeast Asia that the U.S. military could not have a presence in under the Geneva Convention. Air America was developed to provide a means for the CIA to track the influence of Communist China in the region, including countries such as Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam. However, reports suggest that agency operatives became involved with groups engaged in the Asian opium and heroin trade, and that Air America was used to ship drugs around the region. Let's go. The entire Air America operation was eventually suspended in the 1970s. Project MK Ultra. MK Ultra was a clandestine CIA project in place from 1953 to about 1973, during which the agency conducted hundreds of illicit experiments, sometimes on unwitting U.S. and Canadian citizens, to assess the use of electroshock therapy, drugs such as mescaline and LSD, and other methods for mind control, gathering information, and psychological torture. Details of MK Ultra and other Cold War-era programs became public in 1975 during a series of investigations into widespread illegal CIA activities, including assassinations of foreign leaders around the world and within the United States. More recently, in the 1980s and 1990s, the CIA was linked with the supply and sale of crack cocaine in Los Angeles and elsewhere, with the proceeds from these efforts allegedly being used to finance the activities of guerrilla fighters in Latin America. It's like a fundraiser, bake sale, selling crack. All right, guys. Well, we really went hard on this topic today. Hey, man, the CIA. There's lots of interesting things to know. We'll probably be hitting this from some different angles down the line. Now, let's learn about TikTok.
Mr. Commissioner, it's great to have you. Thanks for the time.
Good to be with you. Thanks.
You talk about collecting searching histories, browsing histories, biometrics, metadata. I guess the first question is, what do you suspect that information is being used for?
Yeah, well, most people look at TikTok and they say, well, what's the big deal? It's just another viral video sharing app. And that's just the sheep's clothing. As you walk through, it is a sophisticated tool for harvesting this data. And one thing that we do know is that right now the CCP is running one of the most widespread data gathering operations out there. And TikTok has repeatedly said, don't worry, your data is stored in the U.S. What we've come to find out from some of this investigative reporting and leaked documents is, in fact, according to TikTok employees, everything is seen in China. And so while I think that's a national security issue, it's also an issue when it comes to just applying the plain terms of the Google and Apple app stores, which say you have to be clear about who's accessing the data, why are they accessing the data. It has to be only used to improve the service. And it strikes me that a plain application of that in light of this pattern of misrepresentations about data should result in booting them from the app stores.
You've asked for a response by July 8, and I wonder, have you heard from either company yet? And what about the rest of the FCC? What do other commissioners say?
Yeah, the FCC has been really good and bipartisan when it comes to addressing threats from CCP. We've done it from Huawei. We've done it from ZTE. I haven't heard so far from Apple or Google on this. They still have time. But I saw TikTok had a spokesperson that said, well, of course, some data goes back to employees in Beijing, but don't worry, it's on a, quote, need-to-know basis. And I think the type of need-to-know determination that an entity in Beijing beholden to the CCP reaches is vastly different than the one that we would reach here in the U.S. in such that it's no limit at all, particularly when you understand how some of the PRC's national intelligence laws operate. Once it is accessed in Beijing, the idea that there's a clawback or way to control or limit access, it just doesn't make sense.
Commissioner Carr, you're going after TikTok. This is a Chinese company that's operating in America. But what about American companies in China, like Apple? Is there a double standard here? In response to a 2017 Chinese law, Apple agreed to move its Chinese customers' data to China and onto computers owned and run by a Chinese state-owned company. Isn't that a concern? Should this be broader ranging? Should lawmakers be looking at this?
Absolutely. I'm deeply concerned about some of the hypocrisy we see from Silicon Valley companies. Again, these are companies that stand up and say, look, we back human rights, we back privacy, and yet in their dealings with China, we see a lot of double standards in terms of they're continuing to invest there, continuing to put U.S. user data at risk. And so I do think this should be part and parcel of a broader look at securing U.S. data.
And in terms of enforcement, just like American companies that operate in China, Chinese consumers can get around that through VPNs. Americans can do the same. So if TikTok is taken off the app stores, couldn't they just use VPNs to download it?
Conceivably, but look, I think we have to start taking some steps. And what I'm doing here is only, one of hopefully many shoes left to drop when it comes to TikTok. The Biden administration is undergoing a review of all apps, including TikTok, and I would encourage them to move swiftly to a conclusion of that review. And there's bipartisan interest in this. Previously, Senator Schumer and Senator Cotton have been on the letter. Everyone from Adam Schiff to Cruz and Blackburn have been on it. So there's bipartisan interest in this, not just from the FCC, but also across the executive branch. And I hope they do move forward quickly. But in the meantime, this is a concrete step that Apple and Google could take.
Yeah, once Pandora's box is open, there's no closing it. I don't think there's any way to completely rid Americans of TikTok at this point. Lots of middle school, high school kids and younger, they're all addicted to it. And yeah, short attention spans, bunch of 20-second videos, 30-second videos, TikTok dances, TikTok trends. I'm really trying to figure out how to just develop discipline to stay away from all that stuff, man. Instagram, TikTok. A lot of thoughterry out there that is active through those social media platforms. Not a lot of good comes out of it, if you ask me. TikTok shares your data more than any other social media app, and it's unclear where it goes. Two of your social media apps could be collecting a lot of data on you, and you might not like what one of them is doing with it. That's according to a recent study published last month by mobile marketing company URL Genius, which found that YouTube and TikTok track users' personal data more than any other social media apps. The study found that YouTube, which is owned by Google, mostly collects your personal data for its own purposes, like tracking your online search history, or even your location, to serve you relevant ads. But TikTok, which is owned by Chinese tech giant ByteDance, mostly allows third-party trackers to collect your data, and from there, it's hard to say what happens with it. With third-party trackers, it's essentially impossible to know who's tracking your data or what information they're collecting, from which posts you interact with and how long you spend on each one, to your physical location and any other personal information you share with the app. As the study noted, third-party trackers can track your activity on other sites even after you leave the app. To conduct the study, URL Genius used the Record app activity feature from Apple's iOS to count how many different domains track a user's activity across 10 different social media apps: YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, Telegram, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, Messenger, and WhatsApp. Over the course of one visit, before you even log into your account. YouTube and TikTok topped the other apps with 14 network contacts apiece, significantly higher than the study's average number of 6 network contacts per app. Those numbers are all probably higher for users who are logged into accounts on those apps, the study noted. 10 of YouTube's trackers were first-party network contacts, meaning the platform was tracking user activity for its own purposes. 4 of the contacts were from third-party domains, meaning the social platform was allowing a handful of mystery outside parties to collect information and track user activity. For TikTok, the results were even more mysterious. 13 of the 14 network contacts on the popular social media app were from third parties. The third-party tracking still happened even when users didn't opt into allowing tracking in each app's settings, according to the study. Consumers are currently unable to see what data is shared with third-party networks or how their data will be used, the report's authors wrote. TikTok tells CNBC Make It that the company recently conducted its own test of its app, using the same method as the study, which found that any network contacts went to only 4 third-party domains, all of which the company says are regularly used by other apps for functions such as network security and user certification, among others. Those third-party domains were Google, Apple, and Snap, as well as AppsFlyer, an advertising analytic company that measures the performance of marketing campaigns on the social media platform. In October, Wired published a guide to how TikTok tracks user data, including your location, search history, IP address, the videos you watch, and how long you spend watching them. According to that guide, TikTok can infer personal characteristics from your age range to your gender based on the other information it collects. Google and other sites do the same thing, a practice called inferred demographics. TikTok has been the subject of criticism in the past over how the company collects and uses data, especially from young users, including claims that the company has transferred some private user data to Chinese servers. As CNBC noted last year, TikTok's privacy policy states that the app can share user data with its Chinese parent company, though it claims to employ security measures to safeguard sensitive user data. In 2020, then-President Donald Trump looked to ban TikTok in the U.S. over concerns about the app's data security policies. Before current President Joe Biden walked back those threats and ordered a review of potential security threats posed by foreign-owned apps. YouTube did not immediately respond to CNBC Make It's request for comment. All right. I need some water. All right, and our last clip for this segment.
Well, so let's start this off. I think what's very interesting is how the unique things the Indian government has done to sort of stand up to the Chinese Communist Party, things that many other countries should be doing but haven't. For example, the Indian government banned TikTok and 58 other Chinese apps back in June 2020. And that happened around the time of the border clash. How did that really sort of change how people were talking about China in India?
Well, actually, it all started out, when India and Chinese troops clashed on the border in June 2020. So that particular incident actually, just emerged as an anti-China sentiment across the nation, and people became too furious with that particular thing because 20 Indian soldiers died in that particular incident. So when that happened, there was a complete outrage in the country. Many people went to the streets, burned Chinese products, and during that particular tenure, many Indian people also became much aware of how these Chinese applications and how these Chinese products were actually, were putting a harm to their country. So that particular incident actually, was, I would say, forced. I would not say forced, but that particular incident actually compelled the Indian government to take some major steps, like banning those particular apps, and that was the turning point, I would say. And then till date, they are continuing to banning the apps that are actually, that are stealing the data from many of the customers.
With TikTok, it amazes me. Like it's come out now through leaked audio that TikTok, being part of a Chinese company, Douyin, Beijing has access to all of the user data of TikTok users around the world. And this was something like everyone knew was going to be happening. And yet, even though the Trump administration tried to ban TikTok, that was something the Biden administration stopped.
Right.
And I'm just wondering, is it going to take American soldiers being killed by Chinese troops for the West to wake up?
Possibly, a lot of political interferences also are to be held accountable, right? When the Trump took the right step of banning TikTok, and probably Biden came into scene, and he was trying to revamp each and everything that had happened earlier. But now I think it's a great wake-up call for everyone that this particular app, TikTok, especially, I would say it's a very parasitic app, because it's just driving our young generation into clowns, because each and every particular person is showing up with 10 and 12 seconds videos and putting up online. And especially, having said that, we must also realize that China, uh, especially, investing a lot in artificial intelligence, and these apps are backed by artificial intelligence. So these artificial intelligence algorithms are forcing their mindsets to see more and more videos, which they like, and the sharing keeps on going on, and more people keep downloading those particular things. And we all know that TikTok has been I would say it's a disaster to the young generation.
After the FCC commissioner requested Google and Apple to remove TikTok, apparently ByteDance confirmed that they had access all along. Once TikTok became official sponsor of the popular Euro Football 2020, they secured their image and managed to be unbannable. How much did the CCP subsidy TikTok in order to win the contract? Subsidizing TikTok is an investment to the massive Chinese export machine. Yeah, man, I can speak for me. I have such a desire to escape from all of these social media platforms, man, just to try to enjoy the old ways. I feel like it's where a lot of nostalgia comes from for my generation, just before Facebook, before MySpace, before everything was connected, before OnlyFans. Just enjoy your DVD collections, lads. Go outside, take a hike, listen to music, practice an instrument, read. Okay, guys, well, we wrapped up this section pretty quick. We're going to learn a little bit about Benedictine monks today. And I feel like we're on pace to wrap up the show a bit early, but that's fine. We'll just take it as it comes. Conception Abbey is happy to be your Benedictine monastery, located here in northwest Missouri, where we dedicate everything to the glory of God following the instructions of Saint Benedict in his rule. We've been asked as to what exactly is a Benedictine monk, and how does one become one? We would like to give you the answer and a bit of history as a welcome message from the Conception Abbey. First off, a Benedictine monk is a man of the Catholic religion who follows the rule of Saint Benedict of Nursia, a Christian saint and a patron saint of Europe. Saint Benedict founded multiple monasteries in Italy. Recognized for his wisdom and leadership, men seeking to live out the monastic life sought him out to be their abbot. There is no evidence that he ever contemplated the spread of his rule to any monasteries besides those which he had himself established. The word monk comes from the Greek word monachos, meaning single or solitary. It means to practice asceticism by living alone or with any number of other monks, dedicating one's life to serving others, or voluntarily choosing to leave mainstream society to live life in prayer and contemplation. In Greek, the word can apply to women, but in modern English it is for men, as the word nun would be used for female monks. So that in all things God may be glorified. Rule of Saint Benedict. Benedictine monks live a monastic life with the purpose of glorifying God in all things. For centuries, Benedictine monks have embraced Benedict's rule as their guide to monastic life. The rule is comprised of 73 short chapters, containing two kinds of wisdom, spiritual and administrative. How to live through Christ and how to run a monastery wisely. Many of the chapters focus on being obedient and humble. How does a person become a Benedictine monk? The following commitments are referred to as the Benedictine vows and are promised by a man wanting to become a Benedictine monk. Promise of stability, a commitment to one's monastery. Conversion of morals, living the monastic lifestyle of chaste celibacy and poverty, following the gospel according to Saint Benedict's teachings. Obedience, working under the guidance of an abbot who acts as father of the monastic community. We here at Conception Abbey hope you've enjoyed the brief history lesson. If you're wanting a closer, more personal experience with Benedictine monks, then take a look at Conception Abbey's guest center and our upcoming retreats. If you have been searching for something like this in your life, consider taking the short trip to visit us. Let's go! All right, let's take a look at this video. Spear.
Saint Benedict lived in the 6th century primarily, born in the year 480.
Real only in my audio and left ear hours.
As a young man, went to school in Rome and was scandalized by the corruption and the decadence of society at the time.
Somebody blew it with the audio here.
He was looking for something different. He was looking, in some ways, for a radical way of life in which he could give himself to God. And he found that in fleeing from the world.
And so he left the big city and went out into the wilderness to find God, to seek God.
It basically was a reaction against the environment in which the people were living at that time.
A rebellion against the environment in which they were living at that time. I tell you what, guys, it's funny to think the main thing holding me back from this is my cats. And, I love having cats, and I'm still trying to make something happen with life. But, maybe as the years pass, as I get older, when my cats pass away, I would consider doing something like this, man. Just a godly way to leave life. A godly way to remove yourself from the world. It's something that I find very interesting. We'll see how my 30s go, and, if I'm 40 and I'm still dooming it, I might consider it. But I'm not really sure what kind of a background you have to be permitted, but it's interesting nonetheless.
He wanted to come to know that there's something more in life than what these people are telling me or showing me.
Just a deep hunger to be united with God, and a sense that was possible. The greatest thing I think that Saint Benedict gave to the world was the sense of discretion and balance and simplicity that he built into his rule, his way of life.
It's a way of structuring life so you can pursue the Christian vocation in a particular context with particular concentration and attention to that without the distractions of the external world in some respects.
What's offered in the rule is a guide to finding God.
And the Benedictine way of life helps us to prioritize what is important in our life, what our hearts are truly longing for.
the genius of the rule is this, that there is an assumption in people that the spiritual life can just be lived from the gut out. It ain't so. You don't say, well, now I've got it, now I can coast. There is no coasting in the human life.
The rule provides a structured life that allows you to do that without being distracted by the involvements of the world.
It isn't flashy, it isn't exotic, it's just very simple but balanced, because I think the best way for us human beings to find God is very close to us. It's within our reach.
It seems like there's a hunger in the world that young people want to come and explore this vocation, this calling. They, in some way, experience it in the depths of their heart. They experience that unique call from God. So there's some kind of desire to grow in prayer, a desire to give themselves entirely to Christ. And they see the monastic way of life as a way in which they can give themselves to Christ.
It's a beautiful life, it's a meaningful life, and it will bring you, if it is meant for you, if it is what God is calling you to, it will bring you a much deeper sense of direction and love and completeness than any other life could bring you.
Let's go to a monastery. Next year, I'm going to be a Benedictine monk. Please pray for my vocation. Thank you. May God bless you. God bless you, brothers. I will be showing this to my 7th grade literature class, as we are currently reading the Rule of St. Benedict. It's an option, people. I can certainly understand the desire to leave behind the world. And when you combine that with study and devotion to God, I think it's a beautiful thing. So let's wrap it up with this article, guys. My voice is actually feeling a bit rough today, so I think we're going to go ahead and go just a little bit past an hour and a half here. I'm going to go make some food after that. Let's get it. By the way, I'm thinking Monday I am going to not do a podcast. I want to get the word out early. No podcast Monday. And then Sundays, never podcasts. Never podcasts on Sundays. Let's go. And then this coming week, no Monday podcast. All right. The Benedictine way of life. The following reflection on the Rule of St. Benedict offers us countless opportunities for reflection of our own. All right, here we go. The Rule of St. Benedict. The entire document is less than 100 pages. The author, with characteristic self-effacement, called it a little rule for beginners, written in the 6th century for a collection of serfs, scholars, shepherds, and wealthy scions of nobility. A motley group of would-be monastics, the Rule of St. Benedict survives today as a masterpiece of spiritual wisdom. The roots of Benedictine spirituality are contained in this slim volume, as are guidelines for happiness and holiness. In the Rule's prologue, Benedict said he intended to prescribe nothing harsh, nothing burdensome for his followers. His approach to seeking God was both sensible and humane. For Benedict, a spiritual pathway was not one to be littered with weird and unusual practices. Rather, all that is needed is to be faithful to finding God in the ordinary circumstances of daily life. How to prepare oneself for this simple, but not necessarily easy, way of life is the substance of the rule. Benedict envisioned a balanced life of prayer and work as the ideal. Monastics would spend time in prayer so as to discover why they're working, and would spend time in work so that good order and harmony would prevail in the monastery. Benedictines should not be consumed by work, nor should they spend so much time in prayer that responsibilities are neglected. According to Benedict, all things, eating, drinking, sleeping, reading, working, and praying, should be done in moderation. In wisdom distilled from the daily, Sister Joan Chittister writes that in Benedict's rule, all must be given its due, but only its due. There should be something of everything and not too much of anything. Benedict stressed the importance of work as the great equalizer. Everyone from the youngest to the oldest, from the least educated to the most educated, was to engage in manual labor, a revolutionary idea for 6th century Roman culture. Prayer in a Benedictine monastery was to consist of the Opus Dei, the work of God, psalms recited in common, and Lectio, the reflective reading of Scripture, whereby God's word becomes the center of the monastic life. Prayer was marked by regularity and fidelity, not mood or convenience. In Benedict's supremely realistic way, the spiritual life was something to be worked at, not merely hoped for. The importance of community life is another great theme of Benedict's rule. Prior to Benedict, religious life was the life of the hermit who went to the desert and lived alone in order to seek God. Benedict's genius was to understand that each person's rough edges, all the defenses and pretensions and blind spots that keep the monastic from growing spiritually, are best confronted by living side by side with other flawed human beings whose faults and failings are only too obvious. Saint Benedict teaches that growth comes from accepting people as they are, not as we would like them to be. His references to the stubborn and the dull, the undisciplined and the restless, the careless and the scatterbrained have the ring of reality. Though Benedict was no idealist with respect to human nature, he understood that the key to spiritual progress lies in constantly making the effort to see Christ in each person, no matter how irritating or tiresome. Benedictines make 3 vows: stability, fidelity to the monastic way of life, and obedience. Though promises of poverty and chastity are implied in the Benedictine way, stability, fidelity, and obedience receive primary attention in the rule, perhaps because of their close relationship with community life. Stability means that the monastic pledges lifelong commitment to a particular community. To limit oneself voluntarily to one place with one group of people for the rest of one's life makes a powerful statement. Contentment and fulfillment do not exist in constant change. True happiness cannot necessarily be found anywhere other than in this place in this time. For Benedictines, the vow of stability proclaims rootedness, at-homeness, that this place and this monastic family will endure. Likewise, by the vow of fidelity to the monastic way, Benedictines promise to allow themselves to be shaped and molded by the community, to pray at the sound of the bell, when it would be so much more convenient to continue working, to forswear pet projects for the sake of community needs, to be open to change, to listen to others, and not to run away when things seem frustrating or boring or hopeless. Obedience also holds a special place in Benedict's community. Monastics owe unfeigned and humble love to their abbots and prioresses, not because they are infallible or omniscient, but because they take the place of Christ. Saint Benedict carefully outlines the qualities the leaders should possess: wisdom, prudence, discretion, and sensitivity to individual differences. The exercise of authority in the rule points more to mercy than justice, more to understanding of human weakness than strict accountability, more to love than zeal. What defines the leader of a Benedictine community is not being head of an institution, but being in relationship with all the members. Let everyone that comes be received as Christ is one of the most familiar and oft-quoted phrases of the rule. It emphasizes the preeminent position which hospitality occupies in every Benedictine monastery. Benedictine hospitality goes beyond the exercise of the expected social graces. the superficial smile, or the warm reception of expected guests. Hospitality for Benedict means that everyone who comes, the poor, the traveler, the curious, those not of our religion, or social standing, or education, should be received with genuine acceptance, with characteristic moderation, though he cautions against lingering with guests, realizing that the peace and silence of the monastery must be protected. Too great a merging of monastics and guests will benefit neither, says Esther de Wall in Seeking God, the Way of Saint Benedict. Stewardship is another value which, like hospitality, captures the essence of Benedictine life. On a most basic level, Benedict prescribed care and reverence of material things. Treat all goods as if they were vessels of the altar. For Benedictines, the idea that gardening tools were just as important as chalices has come to mean a total way of life which emphasizes wholeness and wholesomeness and connectedness. The body, the mind, the spirit, material things, the earth, all are one, and all are to receive proper attention. All created things are God-given, and a common-sense approach to resources should prevail. Thus, Benedictine communities are ready to accept the most recent technology, but will use the same bucket for 30 years. Taking care of things has been elevated to a virtue of surpassing value in Benedictine monasteries. The wisdom of Benedict's rule lies in its flexibility, its tolerance for individual differences, and its openness to change. For over 1,500 years, it has remained a powerful and relevant guide for those who would seek God in the ordinary circumstances of life. When Benedict wrote his rule, society seemed to be falling apart. Though materially prosperous, the Roman Empire was in a state of decline after Benedict's death. After Benedict's death, barbarian hordes would have overrun Europe, and the very survival of Western civilization would be called into question. Benedictine monasteries, with their message of balance and moderation, stability, hospitality, and stewardship, were credited with the preservation of Western culture, and Benedict himself was named patron of Europe. Benedictine values are as necessary today as they were in the 6th century. Who could look at the greed is good legacy of the 1980s and not desire change? In an era of countless personal and societal sins, materialism and racism, and the destruction of the earth through waste and carelessness, Benedict's rule remains a powerful alternative, another way of viewing life and people and things that finds meaning in the ordinary and makes each day a revelation of the divine. All right. All right, my friends. Well, a little bit on the shorter side for the stream today. No stream this Monday. I got some activities planned. Another podcast in the bag, boyos. As always, I'm open to suggestions for topics in the Discord, or you could just email me or hit me up on Instagram. Monks live the liturgy of the hours. Their work is organized around these periods of daily corporate prayer, beginning with vigils at 3:30 a.m., Compline at 7 p.m. Wow, 3:30 a.m. The liturgy of the hours reflects the heavenly liturgy of the angelic hosts. The corporate prayer of the church is a source of grace to the entire world. Alignment to the will of God, bringing down fire from heaven. Monasticism is the foundation and preservation of Western culture. Beautiful stuff. I don't think the channel's losing steam. I'm gonna stay consistent with these podcasts. I'm gonna be open to different formats as time goes on. I was talking about doing a cozy stream at some point. I'm just trying to build some momentum, guys. I can definitely get a little bit more experimental here as time goes on. I definitely do feel like days are going by very fast. But it's not like I wasn't streaming every day before. Hell, I was actually streaming more in the past. These are more dense streams. I'm tuckering myself out through reading, and it's just cool to see what goes into making a show like this. I just find a few video clips, find a couple of articles, and then glue everything together with some commentary. I enjoy it. How money is used to control young men's labor and women's sexuality. Thank you, Mr. Vlog City. I appreciate that. We're gaining momentum. Let's go. We're gaining momentum, Susie. Sorry. Momentum gang. Yep. I just think it would be nice to have a little bit of time to think and strategize. I got to get my sleeping schedule together. It's funny how I was working out every day and taking cold baths every day, and then all of that completely stopped when I started this podcast. It's kind of like I took that momentum and that dedication and I took it out of the working out and cold baths and then put it into this. This is ultimately more productive, but now I want to get the working out and the cold baths back. I want to try to continue on that path, striving ever towards being more productive. Yeah, debating people's a waste of time. I mean, debates could happen down the line, but we're going to need to set it up beforehand. He needs to smear. Yeah, numbers mean nothing, but I am going to look to branch out. I think I should think about making more video content. My mind's always working, trying to think about how to grow, how to expand. It's difficult, man, and it's very discouraging to see that some people get a lot of views for just kind of whatever. You know what I mean? Not everybody's putting the effort in, but I believe in the power of momentum. I believe in the power of consistency. So we'll keep it rocking, friendos. I appreciate everybody that's here. I also appreciate the people who watch after the fact. And that is all for today. God bless you and enjoy the rest of your day, my friends. I will see you tomorrow at the same time. Let's go.